If I were a rich man, yabba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dum. All day long, I biddy-biddy-bum. If I were a wealthy man, you wouldn't have to work hard. Yabba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dum. Lord, who made the lion and the lamb, you decreed I should be what I am. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan? If I were a wealthy man.
Our kids can be dismissed. There's good stuff waiting for them down the hall. And to the rest of you, thank you for being here at the 9 o'clock worship service at Community Christian Church. A little over 200 years ago, a teenager left home to seek his fortune, and all of his worldly possessions were bundled up in a little cloth that he carried in his hand. And as he set out, he actually met his neighbor, who was an old man, and a conversation took place that kind of changed the trajectory of this boy's life. The old neighbor said, "William, where are you going?" And he said, "I don't know." He said, "My father is too poor to keep me at home any longer and says that I have to go out and make a living for myself now." And so his neighbor said, "There's no trouble in that, but be sure that you start right and you'll get along fine." And William told his friend that the only trade that he knew how to do was to make soap and candles, because he had helped his father do those things. And the old man said, "Well, let me pray with you. And then after I pray, I'm going to give you a little advice, and then I'm going to let you go on your way." And so they both knelt down, and after the old man prayed earnestly for William, he said this. He said, "You know what? Someone will soon be the leading soap maker in New York, and it can be you as well as anyone. I hope it may be. Be a good man, William. Give your heart to Christ. Give the Lord all that belongs to him out of every dollar that you earn. Make an honest soap. Give it all your effort, and I'm certain that you will be a prosperous and a rich man." When William arrived in New York City, it was hard to get work. He was by himself. He was far from home, but he did remember the words of his neighbor, and so he found a church, and he found Jesus. And the very first dollar that he did ever earn, it brought to him a choice, and he remembered the old man's advice, his neighbor's advice, and he decided that day when he earned his first dollar, "I will give 1/10 of my income to God." And so he did. He set aside 10 cents out of every sacred dollar as to the Lord, and he soon became a partner in a business. And a few years later, his partner died, and William then became the sole owner of the business. He remembered his friend's words even at that time, and he made an honest soap, and he gave it all his effort. And even in his business, he instructed his bookkeeper to open an account and set it aside for God, and 10% of his income went into that account. And he prospered, and his business grew, and his family was blessed, and his soap sold, and he grew rich faster than he had ever hoped. And so he began to say to the Lord, "What more could I give? Could I give you 2/10?" And he did that, and he prospered even more. And then he gave God 3/10, and then 4/10, and finally 50% of everything he made, he gave to God. He educated his family this whole time. He ordered his affairs so that all of his needs were taken care of for life. And from then on, he gave 100% of everything that came in to God. Now, some of you used that young man's soap this morning. How many of you use Colgate toothpaste? Anybody? Yeah. William Colgate was the founder of the Colgate-Palmolive soap and toothpaste enterprise, and he was one of those people who recognized himself as a steward of God and experienced the joy of tithing so much that 10% became 100% over his lifetime. And I don't know too many of us Christians who would hear that story and think, "Nah, not for me. I don't know. To have so much money that everything else in my life is taken care of, so much money that I could actually give 100% of everything that I make at a certain point to God? No, I don't think so. I'm out. I don't think many of us would say that. I think the opposite is true. When we hear a story like the story of Colgate, and there are so many others that we could tell that are like his, there's something in us that says, I'd like to get to a place like that. Wouldn't that be great to get to a place like that? Like deep down, I think most of us really want to give, and we really want to give a lot to God. If you're just joining us today, we are in the middle of looking at 2 chapters in 2 Corinthians, chapters 8 and 9, where Paul talks about a gift that is being taken up for believing brothers and sisters who live in Jerusalem and Judea, who are experiencing and enduring hard times because of a severe famine. And the 2 chapters that Paul writes here are his appeal to the church in Corinth and the believers there to be a part of this giving. And the whole section, the whole 2 chapters, is about money. It's the longest text that we have from Paul on the subject of money. And over in these long chapters, it's money this, money that, money, money, money. But if you'll carefully read, you'll notice that Paul never once, not once, does he use the word money. He doesn't even use a synonym for the word money. And I think it's because even in Paul's day, he knew that he'd get resistance when he brought up money. And we're no different. Like some of you walked in here today and you're like, okay, we're talking about money, but we're in a series on this? Like, like a whole, I'd rather be audited by the IRS, right? Than a sermon on money or a series on money. Come on. I want to tell you today it's okay because you're going to be glad that you have been here. Because what we are doing in these sermons is actually opening a door for you to grow in riches. Do you know that that's what's promised to you? After his parable about the shrewd manager, here's what Jesus said. If you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Wow, that's amazing. We learn a couple things there. Number one, that these paper little folds that we carry around that have 1s and 5s and 10s and 20s, and these plastic cards that we use have a bunch of numbers, that's not true riches. Jesus calls those kind of things worldly wealth, not real wealth, worldly wealth. There's a difference. Real wealth is something else entirely, and it's measured in things that are way more important than the paper that we exchange with one another and the plastic and the numbers on a ledger somewhere. Here's number 2 thing that we learn. The way to true riches, is faithfulness with the lesser riches. You will never be a truly rich person in this life, overflowing with love and honor and dignity and reputation and influence, that those wealth things that mean something, right? The true riches. You'll never have that in the world without also having developed the skills necessary to be responsible with dollars and cents. Irresponsibility with money will shred opportunities to be blessed and rich in this life. And so today is a practical one, because that's really what our text is. And today's advice from Paul, if you implement it, is actually the way to open the door for you to grow rich in true wealth. Here's the problem with that. A lot of us, most of us, aren't really crazy about true riches. We're really more interested in the imitation. We sing along with Tevye, right? God, would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? Right? God's vast eternal plan for you is true wealth that makes this world's wealth look like plastic little toys. And the tragic twist is that it turns out that in our pursuit of all of these lesser riches, we often are blocked from the path to real riches. Several years ago, a book came out called Passing the Plate, and it was one of the most comprehensive studies on American church giving ever done, and research showed that more than 1 out of 4 American Protestants give away no money at all. None. Not even a $5 bill in some offering plate once a year. Nothing. Zippo. Zilch. Barna did some studies, and Barna says that 84% of millennials give less than $50 to charity per year, even though charitable giving ranks as something that is really high on their list of priorities. Today, the average church attender gives 2.5% of his or her income annually. During the Great Depression, that percentage was 3.3% 100 years ago. 37% of those who consider themselves evangelical Christians don't give at all to their church. 2.7%, only 2.7% of evangelical Christians practice this thing called tithing. The authors of Passing the Plate concluded with this: there's a small group of truly generous Christian givers that are essentially covering for the vast majority of Christians who give nothing or quite little. And so here's the logical next question. If Christians aren't giving, then why? How did we lose this idea that giving is a theological matter, that giving is one of the major expressions of having faith in Christ? What has changed so that people who now say, I follow Jesus, also say, yeah, I don't give. I don't do that. And what they found was that though disposable income has risen at an alarming pace since 1920, the fixed costs in households has risen even more. Did you know that in 1970s, fixed costs were about 54% of an American household's expenses? Today, that number is at least 75%. It is likely way more, and it is getting higher with every trip to the grocery store. Can I get an amen? Yes. We are all suddenly, I can see it, you're all suddenly coming out with these just massive muscles. You are jacked and cut. You're way stronger than you were even a few years ago, because we can all suddenly lift $300 worth of groceries as if there's nothing there, right? And all that to say this: when we don't give, it's not really, I don't think, because we don't want to. Man, we hear the story of Colgate. Man, I'd love to do that. It's because we think that we can't. We think that we can't. Dave Ramsey's organization has talked to over 10,000 people in the last few months and asked them about their finances, and the 3 things that come up over and over in those conversations. Number one, the number one feeling people have about money right now is fear. Fear. Number 2, right now people are saying that if they missed even one paycheck, that it would be a crisis in their life. Here's number 3. People have been living this way, meaning paycheck to paycheck, in fear most of their adult lives. And so the problem surfaced long before eggs went to $76 a dozen, right? The decisions that we made with money have killed our disposable income. Making a house payment, making a couple car payments is usually enough to lock household budgets into a tight situation for decades. That's reality. My sources tell me that $1,200 a month is now the new standard amount to have a car and insurance to cover it. 3 years ago, that amount was $700. John Maxwell tells about his 14-year-old son coming home with his first official paycheck from his first ever official job, and he was so thrilled. He came through the door. He came home to his parents, and he's showing off his paycheck, and not 30 seconds into this exchange, he said to his parents, I've been thinking about this on the way home, and I've thought it over, and I'm not sure that I can afford to tithe. And John Maxwell said, here's my son who has more money in his hand than he's ever had before. And what happens automatically? Dad, I really need this money for something else. Out of the mouth of a 14-year-old boy who is just being human, right? He's just being human. Out of his mouth comes this whole question. Where do I put God? Is God first? Is God second? Is God fifth? Is he 23rd in my life? Where is God? And man, when gas is pushing $4 a gallon, it is so easy to decide that God is down the list. This text that we're in today is a housekeeping text. It's not a text we really memorize. It's not the apex of theology. It's just some light administration that Paul is doing so that he can collect a gift and deliver the gift. And yet, there's probably not a lot that's more important for us to hear today than Paul as he talks about the logistics of giving. He speaks about Titus in these verses, and he mentions two other brothers, and we don't know their names. He doesn't give them, but one of them is quite famous and is known by everyone, and the other is just a diligent nerd that everybody seems to trust. And about Titus, Paul says that God has put something in his heart. He's put there a concern for the Corinthian Christians and probably a concern specifically for this collection that is being taken up. But now that desire needs legs so that it will succeed. And Paul recognizes this, and so he develops a plan for the gift that is being collected. Warren Wiersbe says it this way: while it is true that grace giving means giving by faith, it is also true that grace giving does not mean giving by chance. And so I want you to look in this text and see how Paul administrates this gift. First, he knows that if only his name is associated with the gift, then that could be disaster. And so he arranges for this team of money handlers to take care of the offering. And so he removes himself from any criticism. Titus volunteers for the task, and the famous brother is handpicked not by Paul, but by all of the churches, and then this other trustworthy brother is also included. And so here you have the very first financial ministry in Scripture, financial ministry team. And it's a very smart move, because the three of them will guard against any one of them doing something deceitful or stupid with the money. And Paul pulls himself out of the picture. And this is what Paul means when he writes and he says that great pains were taken to do what is right in God's eyes and also in the eyes of the people. In the last few verses of this section, Paul will spend some time encouraging the Corinthians to be ready. He says, don't wait. Don't wait until these guys arrive at your doorstep and then think, oh yeah, we should probably give something. He says, no, plan ahead. Be ready so that when the day for the collection comes, you can carry through with the promise of a gift for the Christians in Jerusalem. And so here's the sermon today. Here's the punch. When we fail to plan, we plan to fail. When we fail to plan, we plan to fail. Being a generous giver is not a position that we just drift into. It's not something we float into. When giving is missing from our lives, likely the culprit is that we failed to plan. There's one big issue that Paul writes about here, and it's this, that when you give without a plan, he says you end up giving under pressure. And a gift given under pressure doesn't ever feel good, does it? Paul uses an interesting word to describe what happens when we give under pressure and without a plan this way. Our English Bibles use the word grudgingly. That's in the text. The Greek word is planexia. Planexia just means somebody encroaching on something that belongs to someone else. And so we can take that to the football field real easily, right? You know what encroachment is on the football field. It's when the defense crosses the line of scrimmage before the ball is snapped, and it's a violation. It's cheating. And planexia is the same thing. It's crossing a line in an attempt to hold on to something or to acquire more and more material possessions without any concern to play fairly or by the book. So planexia is a guy in a mask holding up the convenience store. Planexia is a criminal going into a store and taking anything off the shelves that they can and just booking it. It's a thief ripping off all of your treasured possessions while you're away from your home. And Paul uses this word planexia to describe what happens when we give without a plan. And here it is. what happens is that we feel robbed. We feel robbed. The word that Paul uses here in the last verses of this section for gift is also one we need to pay attention to. He's mentioned the gift before in these chapters that he's collecting to give to the Christians in Jerusalem, but he's never used this word for the gift yet. And what he calls it in this section is the eulogia. Now maybe in that, as I rattle it off, you hear the English word that we get from that, eulogia. It's the word eulogy, right? In the New Testament, the word just means blessing, and that is literally what we do when somebody stands up to eulogize someone else. We do that most often at funerals, right? After a person is gone, there's a service, somebody gets up and talks about all of the good that this person did or the greatness of their character, all of those things. They bless the deceased person with kind words about their life. Now, just a side note here, why do we wait to do that? Why do we wait? We should be eulogizing people every day. Every day. We should be giving the blessing of sharing with our words the incredible things that we see in other people. Would you pick somebody in your life today, and would you give them a eulogy today? Let's do that every day. Tell them why they're special, why they've made a difference in your life. What a great way to love somebody, to actually eulogize them while they're still in front of you. And Paul says that that's the way our giving should be. It should be a blessing. It should be a praise. It should be an honoring. It should be a eulogy of God himself. When we give our worldly wealth away for the benefit of his house, it's the very same thing as standing up on a stage and preaching about how great God is. Our giving, in this act, we are proclaiming, we are eulogizing that God is the greatest ever. The largest Christian group in the African country of Ghana is Scottish Presbyterians, if you can imagine that. And the Scottish Presbyterians were established by, people from Scotland, right? And so their worship is very much like a traditional Scottish Presbyterian service. It's very high church, it's very solemn and rigid, it is very vanilla, okay? But these are Africans in Ghana who believe. And so recently, the African traditional experience has been incorporated into the traditional Scottish Presbyterian experience, and they've incorporated it at the offering time. And so at the offering time, what do you think that these African Christians in Ghana do? They dance. That's what they do. That's part of the African culture in religious and spiritual worship. And so they dance as they bring their tithes and offerings to the front of the church. They get down, right? And man, am I hesitant to do any kind of motion because I am Scottish. And my family actually has a castle. It is true. And so the music is going, and they boogie as they bring their offerings to the offering plate. The offering time is now one of the longest parts of the service because of this, and it's the one time in the service when they smile with joy because they're giving. If you don't plan your gift, here's what Paul's saying, you'll feel ripped off. But if you do plan your gift, you'll feel like doing a little dance. So what's your plan? Do you have a plan? And this is where we get real practical today. Years before Dave Ramsey ever came along, there was a guy named John Wesley, and he wrote most of our hymns in the hymnal. And he gave Christians a simple, very practical, very wise plan, and it's still one of the best ways to operate. And he said this. He said, get all you can, without hurting your soul, your body, or your neighbor. He said, save all you can, cutting off every needless expense. Give all you can. Be glad to give and ready to distribute, ready to distribute, laying up in store for yourselves a good foundation against the time to come that you may attain eternal life. And we can distill that down into this, and Wesley writes about this in different places. I'll just give it to you, the nuts and bolts of it to you. Wesley's plan is this: earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. And the specifics of that looks like this: of all you earn, and note, he says earn as much as you can. Like there's no limit to what you should go out and seek to earn. You want to earn 6 figures? Go for it. You want to save up $1 million for retirement? Go for it. There's no limit to that. But of all you earn, take 10% and give it to God. Bring it into his storehouse, as Malachi chapter 3 says to do, and be ready to do this. Be ready to do this. The offering should never be a surprise for a believer in Jesus. Give 10% to your church family so that ministry can be done, so that God's kingdom can endure, and so that it can grow. And then save 10%. Save 10% for yourself, for emergencies that might come up, for the retirement that you want to have. Save to pass something on to somebody else after you're gone. Save 10%. Then live on the rest. Live on the rest. Give the first tenth, save the next tenth, manage your affairs so that you can live on the rest. That would be, for mathematicians out there, 80%. Tell every dollar of that 80% what to do instead of wondering where it went. And Wesley said this is amazing, that if you could go one step further than this and give 10% and save 20% and live on the rest, he says this, watch this: you'll never have a problem in life. Wow. Now, he meant, of course, not that problems wouldn't come into your life. That's always going to be the case. But what he meant is that, man, if you save that much, you'll never be clouded by the worry of, man, what's this going to cost me? Because you'll have it. You've heard of Murphy's Law: what can go wrong will go wrong. I can tell you from personal experience that Murphy seems to stay out of my life when I have money saved, but he's been really cruel to me when I don't. And I think we've all experienced that. I hope you've experienced both sides of that. I hope you experienced the part where Murphy comes in and you say, okay. The key to giving 10 and saving 10 is to do it first. Let your hobbies, let your leisure, let Netflix get the crumbs that are left at the end of the month instead of God. Do it first. And so here's your homework for this week. As God leads you, would you respond to this invitation to be a giver? Would you get together with your spouse or somebody that you trust, if you're single, and would you plan your giving to God? How much will you give? And when will you give it? How often will it be given? How will the transaction be accomplished? We have at the church an online platform so that you can give. And if that's not the way you boogie down the aisle, the joy box is in the back. Woohoo! Right? I expected a little dance with that today, but we'll save that. Maybe you're here today and you've already accepted the gift of being a giver. And you've been a giver for a while, and you've been faithful in that. And let me say on behalf of God, thank you. Thank you. If I could be so bold to speak on behalf of God, thank you for that. Thank you for trusting God's promise that you are better off with Him and only 90% of your stuff than you are without Him and with 100% of your stuff, because that's what you've trusted in. Thank you because you know the realities of being blessed because of your generosity. And so thank you. And the challenge for us who have been givers for a while is to always be reevaluating. Is God leading us to grow again in this area? Are there things that God is leading you to give up in order to give more? Is it time to take your eulogy that you give to God from 10 to 20 or from 20 to 30 or from 40 to 50? Holy cow. I'd love to be able to do that, right? Whether or not you are new to giving, our culture today encourages us to have getting goals. And that's fine. Amy and I have some getting goals. That's okay, and that's even wise in many areas to have getting goals. But what if we had just as much or more focus on giving goals? And that's the homework this week. Would you just set some giving goals this week? I came across a quote by Nick Saban. Some of you watched Alabama yesterday and on championship Saturday. And I thought this quote was so good. Here's what he said about the players on his teams over the years. He says this: if you're an average player, you want to be left alone because you want to be able to slide by. He said if you're a good player, then you want to be coached. You want to be coached. He said, but if you're a great player, then you want the coach to tell you the truth every day. And I read that quote and I thought, wow, let's just substitute players for Christians. Man, if I'm an average Christian, then I want to be left alone because I want to be able to slide by. If I'm a good Christian, then I want to be coached. But if I'm a great Christian, man, if I set a goal and say, God, I would love it for someday to give away 100% of everything that comes in, I would love that. Then guess what? You want the coach to tell you the truth every day. Every day. And so here I am, taking the shoes of the coach for just 30 seconds, and I'm going to give you the truth because you're great players. And here's the truth. Without exception, tithers will say the same thing. People who have committed to be generous, and it's the same thing that William Colgate learned. People who have determined that no matter what, no matter how much the fries cost, I'm going to take one fry out of every 10 and I'm going to give it to God. All the people who committed to that and have done it for a long time will say this: I'm blessed. They will give testimony that God is faithful. They will give testimony that God is good. They will say that God will never let you down. They will say you cannot outgive God, and they will mean it. And that when they give, what they get back is true wealth. It's not dollars and cents. It is true riches. Now here's also the truth, coming from the coach. In stark contrast to that, I run into people all the time who talk about how cursed they are financially. Man, everything is so expensive. I mean, I can't afford life right now, so 10%, I could never do that. And it's like they're chained up by their money. They talk as if they are cursed because of what they are having to manage. Non-tithers say, I have to keep what I have because I'm trapped and I'm chained up. But tithers say, I'm rich while they dance down the aisle. Which one of those is true wealth? If I were a rich man, if you are rich with real wealth because Jesus has given you the treasure of heaven. God, we are rich because of Jesus. And we continue to be rich in this world when the things we own don't end up owning us. So the lesson of Jesus today is that it's only after we lose everything that we are free to do anything. Would you help us to have the desire today for the true riches that money can't ever possibly compete with? And we look to Jesus for this. We look to the one who left the wealth of heaven and became poor for us so that we who are poor might become rich beyond our imagination. And it's to him, it's to the one who gave us all things that we give thanks. And all the people said, amen. Would you stand? And let's